Should international Etsy sellers sell to the US? If you're in the UK, Canada, EU, or even further afield, should you just stay selling domestically or should you consider branching out and shipping to the US? Today, I'm going to cover some of the worries you may have about international shipping to the US, not just with theory, but I can tell you what real Etsy customers think about buying from an international Etsy store. I'm in the UK, but most of this advice does cover most of the world. Yes, that's right. This is my second video covering the eRank super secret customer survey. And if you're in the US, my friend Starla is covering international shipping for all you US based sellers. So you need to pop over to her video after you're done here and see the perspective from the other side of the pond. So, what are some of those worries you have when thinking of shipping internationally? It's complicated with loads of forms and registrations. Do we have to pay extra taxes? Will the customer get surprise custom charges? Is it very expensive? Will it take a long time? What about the language barrier? Will buyers be put off by my location? These are worries for you, the seller, but also they're worries that buyers had. The eRank survey asked, what are your biggest concerns about buying from another country? Firstly, it's complicated. 35.1% of US buyers did say that customs issues was a concern for them. You'll have heard horror stories with Germany and potentially France requiring registration with recycling companies. Shipping to the EU requires codes to be put on your packages, which actually Etsy takes care of. It seems many countries have us jumping through hoops to ship to them, and it's more and more every year. And it's totally the right of these countries, but I am finding it a struggle to stay on top of all of the new things. But for the US, it's actually pretty simple. You just need the correct customs forms. It's most often a CN22. Your post office or shipping company should have one for you to fill out, or if you use Etsy labels, one is created for you to print out. Make sure and fill in all the details, but you don't currently need tariff numbers or anything. Slap on an address label as normal and pay for it, and that's really all you need. Hopefully you can reassure your customers that generally Etsy parcels with the paperwork filled in correctly sail through customs, and you can reassure yourself that you don't need mountains of paperwork. As for duties and taxes, 36.7% of US Etsy buyers did say that import duties and taxes was a concern when buying from some international shops. Of course, these are the buyer's responsibility, but still, when a buyer gets a surprise charge, they can end up being grumpy with you. Great news, the US customs duty is actually very generous. Up to around $1,600 is free, but it's worth checking if your items are legal to be imported to the US. I'll put a link in the description below where you can check, but generally, if it's okay to sell to Etsy, it seems okay to ship to the US. Who would have guessed that a US company would have set up their policies like that? Of course, there are some state taxes that need to be paid, but great news here is that Etsy automatically adds them to the price the buyer sees for the location and deals with sending it to the right departments. So sellers don't have to worry about all that, and there are no surprises for the buyers. Is it expensive? There's no denying over the last couple of years, international shipping prices have increased greatly. But actually, still international shipping, at least from the UK, is fairly reasonable. The US is kind of the most expensive, so do check, perhaps with your post office, what other countries are going to be as well. The US is such a massive country that items going from one coast to the other are traveling almost as far as an item shipped from the UK to the US. So actual US domestic shipping prices can be fairly expensive as well. So don't feel you have to totally cut your prices to be competitive. Although one point, these prices in the UK tends to be for untracked parcels. If you add tracking, it does significantly bump up the price. In the eRank survey, 69.8% of US buyers surveyed did say that shipping cost was a worry for them when buying from an international shop. So, okay, much as I hate this suggestion, perhaps you could roll your shipping costs into your listing price and offer free shipping so they can see the full cost with no surprises right away in your listing. Etsy Please, can you just show a shipping included price based on location and let us price our items properly? But remember, you have the option to offer a different price for domestic and global customers if your domestic shipping is significantly cheaper. As I said, the US shipping price is a little more expensive than the rest of the world, so you might have to find a balance depending on how much you sell to the US and how much you sell to other countries. Will shipping take a long time? 67.1% of buyers surveyed worried that shipping internationally would take a long time, although in a separate question, nearly 75% said they were happy to wait 7 days or more for an order on Etsy. This is actually slightly down from last year's survey, where it was 79.5% were willing to wait 7 days or more. But it's still a significant number of people happy to wait. And I don't think this is a big trend downwards. We'll have to wait till next year to see what that survey says. Of course, travelling long distances does take a long time. It is generally worth it for smaller and lighter items to ship airmail, and from the UK and the EU, this can take less than a week. It's usually for me around 2 weeks. There is no denying in the UK shipping has been an issue for a few months, but I did find that communicating with my customers what was going on did reassure them. You can add international tracking to your parcels, but of course that ups the price. Of course, if you live further afield or have heavy items that are not really suitable for airmail, then shipping will take longer. My advice here is if your items are things that the US customer can easily get in their own country, then it's going to be harder to expect them to wait. But if you make unique, one-of-a-kind items that only you can create, then your customers are going to wait for you. The language barrier. 21.1% of Etsy US customers surveyed said a language barrier may be an issue for them. Thankfully, this is actually quite a low number. It seems that Etsy customers are aware that even the translations within Etsy messages are although not perfect, they can be good enough for the sale. And listings are translated, so they'll see them in their own language. And at the bottom of the survey, we had a box for other, where customers could put in things that hopefully we'd missed. I scanned through it, and a small number of buyers were worried about being scammed or not getting their items. And to be honest, that works both ways too. Many sellers are worried about being scammed with customers saying they didn't get their item. For peace of mind of the customer, there is now the Etsy Purchase Protection Program, where if anything goes wrong with their order, Etsy will refund them. But this can actually be a worry for the seller. If the item is not in the Purchase Protection Program, then at the moment in time, Etsy is still automatically refunding, but they're refunding out of the seller's money. I have a video about this current worrying situation. It's up here if you want to check it out. But obviously the risk feels a little more for international selling. Over Christmas, I had a large number of my international sales take too long in shipping, and Etsy refunded them. Thankfully not from my money. If I was not eligible for the Purchase Protection Program, this would have cost me a lot of money. So I'm going to say if you're shipping internationally, you're really best to use Etsy labels or have tracked shipping, and do not sell items over $250 worth of value. Make sure and follow all the other rules to make sure your items are eligible, because as I said, Etsy will just refund from your money if your item is not eligible. Even with all these worries, 56.3% of buyers surveyed said they would buy from an Etsy shop based in another country, and 27.8% said they maybe would. Etsy is growing internationally, but it's still larger in the US than in the whole rest of the world combined. In Q4 2021, over 55% of GMS was to buyers in the US. So if you can ship at least to the US and you don't, you're leaving a big chunk of potential sales on the table. The eRank survey is an annual survey of real Etsy buyers. Over 1,000 customers responded to this survey, and myself and my good friend Starla Moore are sharing this data with you, as we love to provide advice based on real data. Although I also work for eRank and I have permission to use this data, These videos are not sponsored. Now you need to go over and watch Starla's video that just came out today and has oodles of advice for US Etsy sellers thinking of shipping internationally. Tell her I sent you, and don't forget to subscribe to us both for more tasty data from real customers.